To order. Welcome to meeting number 56 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Before we resume the consideration of Bill S245, I would like to ask for committee's approval of the study budgets and discuss the calendar briefly so that we can schedule them, and then we will go into that. So the first thing I need to ask the committee members is it the will of the committee to approve budget of $7,250 for the study of Bill S245, an act to amend the Citizenship Act granting citizenship to certain Canadians? Are we good? Okay, good. Adopted. Is it the will of the committee to approve a budget of $1,500 for study of the main estimates 2023-2024? Agreed? Adopted. Okay. Just to give a little glance of the upcoming meetings and the budget and some dates we need to be mindful of. This coming Wednesday, the Minister of Justice and Minister of Defense will appear with officials for one panel each on the Afghanistan study. So that is the meeting on Wednesday, March 29th. April 17th, Monday, because we go into 2 break weeks after that. So the next meeting after March 29th will be April 17th. In order to respect the deadline of April 26th, clause by clause of Bill S245 is scheduled for April 17th, 2023, because we have to take it back to the House before April 26th. So amendments must be sent to the clerk by March 31st, 2023. So that will be this Friday. Okay? So is everyone okay? And that we do this clause by clause on April 17th so that we respect the deadline of the Parliament given to us. Is everyone in agreement? Okay, that's good. Wednesday, April 19th, Senator McFadden has accepted the committee's invitation to appear on the Afghanistan study for 2 hours. So she's already scheduled in. Monday, April 24th, Minister Harjit Sajjan is unavailable, but he has confirmed his availability on Wednesday, April 26th. Okay? But April 26th, we are already scheduled for Minister Fraser and officials. They confirmed that they are available to appear on April 26th for the main estimates. How would the committee like to proceed? I would like to get committee's guidance on which study to prioritize. Minister Fraser was scheduled to come before the committee for the mains, but Minister Sajjan has also given that date of April 26th. Yes, Mr. Reddycop.
Is there any possibility of getting Fraser, the minister, here on the Monday rather than the Wednesday?
Monday we have scheduled. Monday we have given the dates, so we are waiting for an answer. We have given Marco Mendicino 2 dates, April 24th and May 1st. So we are waiting for the confirmation to come from these 2 ministers. Like for Minister Marco Mendicino, whichever date he is free, either May 1st or April 24th. Okay. Let me give you another so for April 26th, how would the committee members like to proceed? Should we proceed with Minister Harjit Sajjan and reschedule Minister for Immigration, or continue with Minister for Immigration? And we will have to get some date. Any comments? Yes, Ms. Lalonde.
I just, Madam Chair, would like just to maybe mention that there's a strong possibilities that the dates that you're presenting to us, that possibly as a switch for Minister Fraser may not be available. He had secured this date again and he's been amazing in always attending our committee. April 26th is the date that I think they have secured with our officials. So I would like the committee to certainly look at this motion as I know timeline is April 30th, but maybe there's a little bit of leverage that we could propose to our chair, particularly on the motion.
Mr. Reddycop.
We'd be okay with that. We haven't had the minister here for a little while. We've had other ministers, so I think that would be okay. The only request I would make is that we try to get through Michelle's motion as quickly as possible.
Okay,
right
so
after that.
for that, I would like to put the schedule in front of you. Minister Mark Garneau has accepted the date of May 3rd, and he will only appear for an hour. So he has confirmed that date. So based on the, if we have to get through S245 and we are not looking for an extension from the House, and we finish it on 17th, clause by clause, 5 meetings cannot happen for that motion before April 30th. So I would request the members to please allow to extend the date beyond April 30th to work and fit in those 5 meetings. Okay? Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a question, excuse me, just a question on clause by clause, to which I understand then April 17th is slotted for that. In the event that, and then the whole thing needs to be done by the 26th of April. And then the 19th is already scheduled for a different piece for the senator. What happens if on the 17th we're not done the clause by clause?
Okay. So, Ms. Kwan, that's a very valid question, and I was going to come to that. We have to report it back to the House by 26th, and based on the schedule, if the will of the committee members is that we finish this legislation and don't ask for extension and extend the date for the motion, then what we can do is that if we don't finish it on 17th, we can go to 19th and do that and reschedule the Senator McFadden. So right now, for Wednesday, April 19th, Senator McFadden is scheduled. So if in case we cannot finish the clause by clause on 17th, if the will of the committee members is to finish this legislation and report back to the House before April 26th, we can schedule another meeting on 19th. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes, legislation should be first.
Okay. Everyone is agreed on that? Okay. Okay. So, like we are trying to schedule, we are waiting for the date from Minister Marco Mendicino. Mark Garneau has already given the date. And Minister Sajjan has, we will have to reschedule Minister Sajjan's date if the will of the committee members is to have Minister for the immigration on 26th. So, Madam Clerk, if you can work on these dates. So, we will try to schedule those meetings on the motion which was passed by Michelle Rempel-Garner as quickly as possible, as soon as we can schedule the meetings. So, is that okay with everyone? Okay? Thank you. Anything else we need to know? Yes, Ms. Lalonde.
Maybe I misunderstood, and I want to clarify. So my understanding is Minister Sajjan had confirmed the 26th for the motions presented, but we already had Minister Fraser scheduled. I was under the impression I apologize for this maybe communication. I was under the impression we are wanting to see Minister Sajjan on the 26th, and we'll just allow when time occur of Minister Fraser to come. So I just want clarification from my colleague.
What Mr. Reddycop said was that we should have the Minister of Immigration on 26th and reschedule Minister Sajjan, as he's already scheduled to appear before the committee for 26th, to have Minister Fraser in and then reschedule Mr. Sajjan.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that I don't
Yes,
know
Ms.
this.
Lalonde.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I really don't know the disposition of Minister Sajjan, but the fact that we have not seen him here. I would encourage maybe the member to consider having him come, since he is available on the 26th. Like I say, I just want to make sure. I know that our Minister Fraser may not have availability other than the 26th, but considering the importance of maybe. So I just, like I said, I just want to make sure everybody understands we're saying no to Minister Sajjan.
Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Why don't we proceed this way? We obviously want both ministers to come before the committee. I think for the main estimates, it's important for the minister to come before us. And I also think that it's important to have Minister Sajjan to come before us. Why don't we then try to, we will switch whoever in order to ensure that we can secure a different date for whichever minister. So, for example, if Minister Sajjan, let's say, if we say that on the 26th we're going to have Minister of Immigration, Mr. Fraser, instead, and if we're able to secure a date with Minister Sajjan, let's say in May, then we should then move Minister Sajjan to May.
I will request that. So that's like based on today's discussion.
So
we
based
will
on the
request, we will give new options to Minister Sajjan. He is not available on 24th. We are waiting for an answer from Minister Mendicino also.
Yeah.
We have given him two options, 24th and 1st. So we will try to confirm as soon as possible these dates.
Yeah, alternatively, Madam Chair, if, for example, Minister Sajjan said, no, that's the only date, I don't have any other availability at any other time, then we should say to Minister Fraser to say, okay, the 26th, it appears that we have a conflict, so is there another availability in May sometime in order to accommodate your appearance? So we should actually be flexible to see how we can adjust both of these ministers and find that time.
Okay,
I guess is
we'll
my
do
point.
that. As Mr. Reddycop.
I agree with that, and I would just suggest that we use our executive committee, even informally through email or phone calls, just to kind of confirm that amongst ourselves that we're all in agreement with that, because we have a 2-week break coming up. So
Yeah, no, that is fine. I will check with the minister's schedule, like the clerk will work on that, and then once I get any updates, I will update the members. So for May 3rd, Mark Garneau has agreed to come for 1 hour. Is it all right for the second hour to schedule the officials for DND? Because that was also in the motion. Invites be issued for the appearance of senior departmental officials from the Department of National Defense to appear before the committee. So, that we can. Okay, that's good. So, now we can proceed to S245. Sorry, Senator and Mr. Hallen, for that. Today, pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the committee will resume consideration of Bill S245, an act to amend the Citizenship Act, granting citizenship to certain Canadians. On behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome the sponsors of the bill, Honourable Yona Martin, Senator, and Jasraj Singh Helen, Member of Parliament for Calgary Forest Lawn. Yes, Mr. Reddycop.
just before we start, can I confirm, are we going to do an hour now? What's the timing going to look like for this meeting? Is it going to be an hour panel with these two? Exactly. That's what I'm asking right now.
Started, so we have 2 hours from 3:42. Okay, so you will have the sponsors of the bill will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks. You can please begin, and then we will go into round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, colleagues. It's an honor for me to speak to you about this Senate Public Bill S-245, formerly Bill S-230, an act to amend the Citizenship Act to permit certain persons who lost their Canadian citizenship to regain citizenship. This bill is about a group of Canadians. I say Canadians, but they are lost Canadians until we are able to reinstate their citizenship rightfully. As a proud, naturalized Canadian, I was born in South Korea, but first arrived in Vancouver in 1972. I became a citizen 5 years later. I understand the value, the symbolism, and the importance of our citizenship. I come to you today humbly as a naturalized Canadian and someone who came across this important group of lost Canadians and their plight. And I know there are other groups as well, which I have learned and I've been able to work on with Don Chapman, who is here as one of the witnesses today. I know he is a true champion of lost Canadians. This Senate bill addresses a specific gap in the Citizenship Act to capture a group of Canadians or lost Canadians who lost their status or became stateless because of changes to policy. In 1977, a Citizenship Act added a new provision that applied only to second-generation Canadians born abroad on or after February 15, 1977. In order to keep their citizenship, these individuals had to reaffirm their status before their 28th birthday. This law was passed and then forgotten. The government never published a retention form. There were no instructions on how an individual would reaffirm their Canadian citizenship. And for those affected, they were never told a retention requirement even existed. In 2009, the Citizenship Act was amended in Bill C-37. It was one of the first government bills that I had a chance to study as a member of the committee that studied C-37. This change saw the age 28 rule repealed entirely. Canadians caught up in the age 28 rule, but who had not yet reached the age of 28 were grandfathered in. However, what I didn't fully realize at that time was that Bill C-37 did not include Canadians who were born abroad between 1977 and 1981, essentially those who had already turned 28 before the passage of Bill C-37 in 2009. Today, the age 28 retention rule still remains only in effect for those second-generation Canadians born inside a 50-month window, from February 15, 1977 to April 16, 1981. So those who had already turned 28 when that age 28 rule was repealed through Bill C-37. Many of these individuals were raised in Canada from a young age. They were born abroad. Some came to Canada like me, but at a much younger age, such as 2 months of age. They went to school in Canada. They raised their families in Canada. They worked and paid taxes in Canada. And yet, they turned 28 without knowing that their citizenship would be stripped from them because of the change in policy from that previous bill I spoke about. Bill S-245 will allow these Canadians to continue their lives without fear, knowing that they are valued and supported by reinstating them as Canadians. Again, I would like to acknowledge the work of Don Chapman, a tireless advocate and champion for lost Canadians, who will appear before you later today. And colleagues, Bill S-245 received unanimous support in the Senate, and today, I invite your support of this bill here in the House of Commons Committee. I would also like to acknowledge MP Jasraj Halan, the sponsor of the bill in the House of Commons, and thank him for his work and dedication to helping lost Canadians, and to this bill which will reinstate citizenship to a group of lost Canadians who have always been Canadians and rightfully deserve to be given back their citizenship. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention MP Jenny Kwan, who has also been a tireless champion on this particular issue as well. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Martin. We will now go to our round of questioning, and we will begin our first round of 6 minutes each. And we will start with Mr. Kimmich. Mr. Kimmich, you can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just thank you, colleagues, for your patience while we conducted committee business. I'm going to ask you to wait a little bit longer because I have just a notice of motion I want to give verbally to the committee. And then I have a few questions to ask you. So this is just a notice I'm providing verbally that the committee report the following to the House. that Russian opposition leader Vladimir Kara-Murza is facing political persecution in the Russian Federation, including a show trial with high treason charges following his public condemnation of the unjustified and illegal war by Russia against Ukraine, that Vladimir Kara-Murza has survived 2 assassination attempts by poisoning, including in 2015 and 2017, and that he is currently imprisoned in Russia and his health is failing, that Vladimir Kara-Murza is the recipient of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize awarded by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and is a senior fellow to the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. Therefore, the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration calls on the Government of Canada to grant honorary Canadian citizenship to Vladimir Kara-Murza and demand that the Russian Federation set him free. I have it in French and English just for the clerk's convenience. So, colleagues, that was the last bit of administration I wanted to cover off. Senator Martin, maybe if I could ask you first, this is the second time that this bill is basically coming through here. Can you maybe talk about the sense of urgency, perhaps, in actually having this bill passed? We are so close to actually closing this legislative hole created by Parliament inadvertently, and this is an issue now that's lasted several decades. So perhaps I could start with that, is about how close we are to completing this bill, and if amendments were to be considered, it would send it back to the Senate and cause further delays. So I'll start with that.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, this is the second iteration of the bill. The first one, S-230, died on the order paper. I don't even remember the year, but a few years ago. So this is the second attempt, and it has reached this committee. So I'm very pleased that we are here at this stage, and thank all members for their attention to this bill. The Lost Canadians issue is decades old, and like I said, I came across an individual, Don Chapman, who I'm sure some of you have also met with him, and he's quite a champion because he himself had been a Lost Canadian. So from that point of view, he has been very tireless. So I've been educated through just my meetings with him and looking at some of the details of how we have these groups of individuals who become lost and who need to be reinstated. So there are other categories of Lost Canadians for sure, and to look at that separately would require, perhaps a government legislation or maybe other bills that may be put forward. I know that there have been piecemeal attempts in the past as well, but for this specific bill, I decided to start with a very small cohort. It made sense that they had already turned age 28 by the time C-37 came into effect, and therefore, even though it was grandfathered to those who hadn't yet turned 28, those who did were left out. So it seemed like a natural group that we should address first. So I looked at all the other categories, but this one seemed, the least contentious or the most obvious. So that's why I think in the Senate, with my Senate colleagues, and even before committee, the first time around, we didn't have any officials raising any concerns. They just could not answer how many people would get captured, should this bill be adopted. So I do know that we don't know the exact numbers, and the officials before the committee last week had attempted to answer some of that, but that's why it's very focused, and I hope that this committee and the House can get behind this bill. We are very, very close.
Madam Chair, how much time do I have? 1.5 minutes, perfect. So, like you, Senator, I'm a naturalized Canadian as well from communist Poland, and I know my dear friend from Calgary, just north of me, who's taking 40% of my riding, is a naturalized Canadian as well. You talked about the fact it's probably a few hundred people, and there's varying numbers. The department has said approximately 130 individuals are affected by the 1977 Act, retention requirements that have received a grant of citizenship through the Citizenship Act 5.4 as a discretionary grant. Since then, there could be a few hundred more. We have another colleague, Robert Kitchen, from Saskatchewan, who's actually one of the impacted Canadians. Thankfully, I think it was his father, his grandfather actually told him that this was going to be the case. Do you think in this case, because it's a few hundred Canadians, some of them which may not know, that they have lost their citizenship, that there's a sense of urgency in passing this bill as quickly as we can before the potential for another election being called?
Absolutely, and imagine if you find out when you go to renew some formal process that requires proof of citizenship, that you suddenly discover that you are not Canadian, or if you're retiring and needing to collect your pension. So it is a matter that's quite dire for those who are impacted by this. So I would absolutely urge the committee to look at this very focused bill on this particular cohort and lend your support to the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Ms. Kayabaga. Ms. Kayabaga, you will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome the Senator into our committee today and welcome back our colleague from the opposite side who has left us on our committee. Senator, I want to ask you a few questions about this bill. Last week, IRCC officials explained to us that Bill S-245 would restore citizenship only to some of the people who were impacted by the former Section 8 of the Citizenship Act. But the bill would remedy those who never applied to retain their status before they turned 28. However, those who have applied to retain it but were unsuccessful due to not meeting specific residency requirements will not see the remedy from your bill. It seems obvious to me that both groups impacted by the former Section 8 should be scoped into this bill. Do you agree? And if you don't agree, could you share why?
Yes, so as I read the Hansard from last week's committee, I saw the issues that were raised by the officials. The official was asked on what basis that the application may have been denied to those that did apply to get their citizenship after the adoption of C-37. And there were several reasons why applicants were denied citizenship to Canada, and the officials you heard from were not able to quantify what those exceptions were or why people were excluded decades ago. So for me, I would say that's focusing on those that did not realize that they that on the age 28 rule, those who had not yet applied, to those who did and were rejected. Those reasons could be serious. We don't know what they are. And so I'm not sure that we should open that door. And I would just say if we adopt it as is, it would cover those who have been impacted by the age 28 rule.
And I understand that you developed S-245 after consulting with stakeholders, as any good legislator would do, actually. And there have been a number of submissions sent to this committee by stakeholders asking that S-245 include a solution for people born abroad in the second generation after 2009. Would you say that you support expanding this bill to include provisions of this nature? If not, would you care to explain why you would think it would be problematic to allow individuals born abroad in the second generation after 2009 acquire Canadian citizenship?
Yes, so this is a very narrow bill that is specifically targeting those that have been impacted by the age 28 rule. I know there are other categories of lost Canadians, as you've mentioned just now, and what stakeholders are asking for, but it is something that could be done separately, perhaps in a government legislation or in another separate private member's bill, either from the House or the Senate. So it does go beyond the scope of what I have crafted, a very concise, focused bill to capture the age 28, those caught up in the age 28 rule. So I can be supportive, but it's not something that I can address right now because it's beyond the scope of this bill.
On this bill in the past, you've also identified that you wanted to keep it narrow in order to try to avoid unintended consequences. Last Monday, IRCC officials were in this committee and they told us that granting a large numbers of people automatic citizenship would almost certainly lead to unintended consequences. Do you agree that this could potentially cause these unintended consequences as the bill is written right now, and some of the problems and the revisions that need to be amended for this bill? Could you comment?
Okay, and I believe that's what was raised by the official, that the bill as written is unclear as to the effect on the first generation limit. but could be interpreted as moving the limit for anyone born between April 2009 to June 2015. I found it interesting to hear her perspective in that it's not something that officials raised with us when we studied the bill in the Senate. So I had the law clerk in the Senate who helped me with C-243 sort of give me a response to that concern, because it was not something that we encountered in the Senate. So this is something that I received actually just before this committee, that subclause 1, Section 3, subclause 1.3 was included to remove the current transitional provisions in subsections 3.4 and 4.1 of the Citizenship Act, which have and will continue to have their effect.
Sorry, Senator. My apologies. I really do have to ask one last question before my time is
go
up.
ahead.
I want to go back to a similar question I just asked you earlier, just for clarification. S-245 proposes to move the application date for first-generation limit rule to 2015, and making it so that anybody born abroad between 2009 and 2015 would automatically become citizens by descent, regardless of generation. It does seem in Congress that you don't want to expand the bill to a very small group of additional people impacted by the former Section 8 provisions, yet you seem to have no issue with the fact that this bill would see untold number of people born abroad between 2009 and 2015 acquire citizenship, even though they may not have a connection to Canada. Could you explain this inconsistency, please?
Okay, so the second part of what I was going to say previously is that the date reflected in subclause 1.3 is the date of the coming into force of those subsections changes made in C-24. So while it could be made more clear as written, the bill does not purport to have retroactive effect. That would need to be explicit and cannot be implied. Without retroactive effect, anyone born between April 2009 and June 2015 would be governed by the Citizenship Act as it read prior to the enactment of this bill.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Savit Tremblay. You will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very happy to be here for the first time, actually, in this committee. Very happy to replace my colleague from Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Senator. Thank you for the presentation. Now, with the bill, are we sure 100% that there will no longer be any more lost citizens, who there will be no more dead angles, if you will, and situations that we will have forgotten about?
Thank you for your question. This bill will specifically address those that were captured in the H-28 rule. So hopefully in that cohort will all be captured by the passage of this bill. But there are other categories of lost citizens, and I know that there are members who are interested in amending the bill beyond the scope of what this bill was putting forward. So no, the answer is there will still be other groups, and we do need to be vigilant, and maybe, you know, really as a government, the entire Citizenship Act needs to be reviewed carefully. It's a very thick act. It's quite complex, and these are, in essence, piecemeal corrections. So my bill attempts to just really address a very small cohort. So there will still be other lost Canadians, and I'm aware of that, and I want to correct that in the future.
So what I understand is that you're recommending to this committee to eventually study a more comprehensive revision of the bill, but the act, but your bill is not eliminating all the issues. But even this group, this cohort affected by your bill, should we create mechanisms, put mechanisms in place to make sure that the follow-up is done being properly?
I think that is a very good point, which was also raised in the Senate, as to once this bill is adopted, if it is enacted, how do those individuals know that this change has been made? So that will be the purview of the government of the day and the department to use various mechanisms online as well as other campaigns, and there'll need to be a multi-pronged approach to just get the information out, because in the past, you know, laws changed and people weren't aware and they lost their citizenship. So we do need to ensure that that kind of communication is done effectively. So thank you for raising that point.
Non, on peut imaginer.
So losing one's citizenship can create a number of difficult situations, but according to your current information, will there be additional negative impacts that have to do with the loss of citizenship of the cohort that is targeted by your bill?
My hope is that with this focus bill, there will not be negative impact. I know what was raised regarding the moving of the date to June 2015 could potentially create...
En fait, je vous précise pour ceux et celles.
Just to specify those who have already been victims of the legislation, if you will.
Okay, I missed the first part of your comment.
En fait, je voulais juste préciser.
I was just trying to specify the question, so not in the future after the adoption of the bill, but the people, the cohort who were the victims of the gap in the legislation, if you will.
So hopefully this bill will absolutely address that issue and the cohort that we're aiming to address, and that they will be reinstated as Canadians.
Mais est-ce que le projet de loi.
But in the bill, is there any compensation that's envisaged for the people who suffered such a thing?
No, there's nothing regarding compensation in the bill, but rather just the citizenship itself, which is very important.
Croyez-vous.
Do you believe that it would be useful to add some kind of compensation to this bill?
It's not something I envisaged. It was more that everyone knows the citizenship is what is the most valued, and it's invaluable, so to speak. So there's no compensation component that was considered nor as in this bill.
1 minute and 20 seconds.
Une minute encore.
So I have 1 more minute. So in other words, well, I'll maybe re-ask one of my questions in a different manner, because you're saying that the citizenship is very valuable, but were there consequences that went beyond simply losing one's citizenship on the lives of these people? Maybe they suffered additional negative situations. Maybe that information was brought to you.
Yes, there is much suffering, as you can imagine, if one realizes that the country of, that they've known for most of their lives is no longer accepting them as citizens. So the irreparable damage that would have emotionally, mentally, really is immeasurable. So I understand that there are stories of various families, and even those that are outside of this scope, and there are families that are suffering because of the rules that have been changed and the Citizenship Act being the way it is, that there are people who are lost Canadians. So that will still exist, and we have to address that as a nation. But you're absolutely right that the damages are grave, and they're great. I don't know.
Sorry for interrupting, Senator. Time is up. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you can please begin. You will have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Senator for bringing this important bill forward. I appreciate it giving us an opportunity to look at the lost Canadian issues. And as you've indicated, Senator, the scope of the bill is very limited. So that means that many people will still be left out in the lost Canadian situation. You were just mentioning about the suffering to which people have to endure as a result of that. What we do know, of course, is that the second generation rule cutoff took place in 2009 from the previous administration. And so consequently, a class of people, Canadians, have then all of a sudden lost their right to be Canadians and to be deemed as, well, lost Canadians and second-class citizens in that way. So that said, we have an opportunity to fix this. I get it that the scope of the bill is only dealing with the 28-year rule. Do you have any objection to the idea and the concept of fixing the other lost Canadians on the second generation rule as a result where people have been cut off as one piece. And then the other piece is to fix the rule for those who were born before 1947, the war heroes, if you will, who fought for Canada and died for Canada and were never recognized as Canadians. Would you agree that we should actually try and fix those? Would you have any objections to that?
First of all, I want to thank you and recognize the work that you have done on this issue for years. And the two groups that you mentioned, the second generation cohort and those before 1947, I am aware of these groups of lost Canadians, and it's very important to look at them. I would say that if, as a committee, I'm not sure if this committee has studied the lost Canadians issue in great length, and if maybe that could be looked at together, and whether the government of the day or yourself or maybe even myself from the Senate, we could work together and look at these categories separately. But for this bill, which is very narrow in scope, it was purposely designed in that way so that everyone, because all the other groups you're talking about, there will be much debate about these categories, and I know that in the Senate it was unanimously adopted. So these are all things that will have to be looked at carefully. So I would say I support it in spirit, and it's something that we could do afterwards. But for the purpose of this bill, to keeping it narrow is the way I would recommend.
Thank you. Thank you. And of course, luckily, we will actually have experts who will come after this panel. Don Chapman, as you've mentioned, who spent his entire life virtually fighting on this issue. And he has brought, actually, to share with all of us this nifty little thing to tell us all about it. The matter, of course, is actually been looked at by committee through different times. Bill C-37, Bill C-24, and so on. So this has been debated over and over again. What we do know is that there are a group of citizens who's lost their Canadianness because of the Bill C-37 repealing their right, and so we need to make them whole. And in fact, as a result of that, a group of Canadians are suing the government at the moment. And as we speak, people's lives are being destroyed because their lives are being separated with their loved ones, and they can't come to Canada to live their life. So I appreciate that, we have time, but really we don't, because people's lives are being impacted. So I feel the urgency of the families who want to bring this forward. But what I'm hearing from you, though, is that you don't object to trying to fix this. And so therefore, I certainly hope that we at the committee will try and do that, because I think it is important to try and fix things so that people's lives are not being destroyed. With respect to the age 28 rule, with the amendments that you've brought forward, there's still a couple of gaps to which the officials, when they presented to us, I think it was last week, that they indicated. And if the committee members were to bring amendments to fix those gaps for the age 28 rule, would you have any objection to that?
I'm not sure what the other, what amendments. So here, first of all, in terms of this bill, I would urge the committee to look at it in its current scope and to look at the other issues separately. In terms of if the amendments are going to clarify what's in the bill specific to this cohort, then I am open to hearing what that will be. And as I said earlier to the question from one of the members, that some of the gaps that have been pointed out, I did answer to one regarding those that have applied that were rejected. That we don't know what those reasons are, so we should leave it to those that haven't yet applied. And the other issues that were raised by the officials, if the amendments themselves address to clarify the bill, then I would be open to that.
Thank you. Yes, I believe that there will be amendments that would be required to address specifically the age 28 year rule piece. And then I think that it would be important to bring forward amendments to address the second-generation cutoff and their descendants, to address the issue around the war heroes in recognizing them. And so hopefully committee will get to that. We will have opportunities, and by the way, Senator, and I think you might have copies of it. If you don't, I would ask the clerk to pass it on to you. We have received a giant stack of submissions for people on
Sorry
this
for
issue.
interrupting.
And so,
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Kwan. Your time is up.
thank you. Then,
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I just ask if the clerk can pass on the information?
We will come to
issues
you
that
like
we've
in the next
received
second round.
for the senator?
Yes.
Thank
Will
you.
do. We will now proceed to Mr. Kimmich. Mr. Kimmich, you will have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Donc,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have another verbal motion that I would like to provide. And here it goes, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship and department officials be invited to appear before the committee to update it on the 2022 additional protocol to the 2002 Canada-U.S. Safe Third Country Agreement signed by the Government of Canada on March 29, 2022, by the Government of the United States of America on April 15, 2022, with a coming into effect on March 25, 2023. I have it available here in English as well to the benefit of our clerk.
continue just so it makes the meeting simpler. Senator Martin, do you believe that when you got the help from the law clerk in the Senate and the assistance in writing this bill, that they would have made a mistake in drafting the bill?
Well, I have the explanation regarding the third subclause, or 1.3, and I could read that sort of explanation again. I don't know if that's clear, but
I'm just wondering if you think that the lost Canadians you're hoping to address through this bill,
yes.
that you're not going to be able to address those lost Canadians in this bill.
No, I don't believe that. I think as written, it does address those that were captured in the H-28 rule, so that's clear. The question about the June 2015, which would then affect the first generation limit to from April 2009 to June 2015. It's like, I think the second part of her the explanation from the legal counsel says that while it could be made more clear as written, the bill does not purport to have retroactive effect.
Mm-hmm.
That would need to be explicit and cannot be implied. Without retroactive effect, anyone born between 2009 and June 2015 would be governed by the Citizenship Act as it read prior to the enactment of S245. That clause was, the subclause was put in so that my bill, if enacted, will intersect and work effectively with the previous bills, C-24, not the opposite as implied by the officials. So if there's a something that could be amended to greater clarify this, I'm very open to that.
Open to it?
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask this. When Bill S-230 was being debated, that was back June 16, 2021, the most senior official there was Catherine Scott, an Assistant Deputy Minister, Settlement and Integration, and Alec Atfield, the Director General, Citizenship Branch, Strategic and Program Policy. We heard something different from officials here at committee last week. Some of them said that there were equity issues involved. Did you hear something like that? There were any problems? Just a quick yes or no, because I have a question for Mr. Halan specifically on this.
No, we did
No.
not hear any issues.
So there are no issues then, but now there's people of a lower grade, there was no assistant deputy minister here last week, said at the Senate 2 years ago there was no problem. Now they've raised there are problems. And to Mr. Halan, since you sit on the Finance Committee, you've sat on this at this committee as well. Have you ever heard a situation where over the years the officials have contradictory opinions on the same bill? Like, this is the identical bill from S-230 to S-245. Nothing has changed in the contents of the bill, but now there are two opinions on the bill's content.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmich, my good friend. And I'd just like to open by thanking the committee for letting us be here today and for all the hard work of people like my good friend, Senator Yuna Martin, and Don Chapman for all the incredible work they've done to get it this far. And I think this is the furthest this bill has ever gotten. To your question, Mr. Comich, definitely, I mean, there's differences of opinions all the time inside this House, but I think what is clear in this very narrow and specific bill is the spirit behind getting the specific group of lost Canadians the right of granting them their citizenship again, something that was stripped from them very unfairly and something that they didn't know about. So I think our action moving forward, and I think you highlighted something very important, that this is a narrow bill and we don't know how much time we have. An election can get called at any point. And then all the good work that's led us up to the furthest we have ever been with this bill can be wiped out if we don't move on this quickly. So in my opinion, and I think that's the opinion of the Senator as well, that we should get through this as quickly as we can to give citizenship right back to those that were stripped of it unfairly.
Time is up. We will now proceed to MPLE. MPLE, you will have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, thank you to our witnesses for being here. Senator, you just said in response to MP Kayabaga's question that the bill, the bill should be made more clear, end quote. Are you now saying that you would welcome amendment to your bill?
The clarity that I was referring to is regarding the concern that was expressed about the effect on the first generation limit, that it would be moved to June 2015. So I had not intended any unintended consequences with that specific subclause. So if there is language that can clarify that, I would be open to it.
Thank you. Senator, you have agreed that there is some confusion with the part of the bill. Just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, IRCC officials have said that the mention of the 2015 date effectively changes the application date of the first generation limit rule. Are you saying that this is not your intention?
Yeah, that was not the intention of that subclause, and the explanation I've read twice from the Senate Legal Counsel about it is that the bill doesn't purport to have a retroactive effect, which is what is being addressed by the official from last week. So, as I said, for that specific subclause, if there is language that will clarify so that we don't create an unintended effect, I would be open to that.
Again, through you, Madam Chair, Senator, can you explain what it was that you wanted to achieve with the mention of the date and how Legislative Council advised you it could be fixed?
Yeah, so the exclusion provision, which is the subsection 1.3, was tied to the date of the coming into force of Bill C-24. There were some concerns during the drafting of S-245 that not including this clause may cause conflict between my bill and C-24. So that's why it was put in. However, if what I'm hearing from departmental officials now is that they're, there could be some confusion and an unintended consequence. As I said, I would be very open to an amendment that would clarify that specific section.
Thank you, Senator. Again, through you, Madam Chair. Senator, in the United States, our closest neighbor, the rule is that all persons who are born abroad but have either a citizen parent or grandparent who meet a residency requirement are citizens by descent. Wouldn't this make more sense that after first generation limit?
Well, we have our laws as is because of previous bills like C-37 and C-24. What you're talking about is not captured in the bill that is before us, so I won't comment on what makes more sense or not, but rather to say for this specific bill that's really addressing those that are captured by the age 28 rule, that I ask the committee to support the bill.
So wouldn't it make more sense to deal with this issue all at once rather than in pieces?
Well, I know.
To add some amendments if it needed. So why would not you be open for those amendments to make it clear once for all?
Well, the other categories are definitely different in scope, and it would require separate debate. So for this particular bill, I'm just saying that it was very focused and narrow to begin with, and that's what I am hoping that this committee will support.
Madam Chair, do I have? Oh, I'll have to. I think it's 25 seconds.
Just say thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Senator, for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. And now we will proceed to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes. You can please begin.
Oui, alors, oui. Juste attendre. Oui, là, c'est bon. Alors, écoutez.
So, people who will regain their citizenship, will they, do you think, still continue to experience negative impacts, for instance, when they travel internationally? Or will it be a thing of the past for them completely? So will they be treated exactly same as the citizens who never lost their citizenship?
Yes, so once they are reinstated and their documentation is complete, my hope is that they would be treated as any other Canadian. That's the purpose of this bill, is to ensure that that does happen. And hopefully, with the enactment of the bill, the reinstatement will be helpful to those individuals.
Et est-ce que vous croyez?
Do you think that these people will continue to have worries when it comes to their citizenship? Do you think the confidence will have been damaged?
Yes, just with anything that impacts someone negatively, there is a possibility that, there could still be the remnants of the trauma, the pain, the emotional and mental duress. So I don't know for each individual case how that will be, but that is my hope is this bill, when it corrects those that were captured in the age 28 rule, it will be permanent and definitive, and it will help them feel Canadian in the country that they call home.
Et dites-moi aussi dans.
So, a question to both of you. Were you ever made aware of a concrete case of loss of citizenship? Did anyone, seek assistance with you in such a case of a loss of citizenship?
I myself have not dealt directly with the case, but I know I spoke of two very specific examples in my speech in the Senate, and I'll just share one with you. She has regained her citizenship with the help of Don Chapman and ministerial discretion, but an example is Ms. Birdie Funk was born in Mexico to two Canadian parents, but was brought to Canada when she was just 2 months old. She grew up in southern Manitoba, where she went to school, made friends, and learned to skate on the pond behind her house. Then at age 36, she applied to renew her passport. She received instead a letter from the government explaining to her that she was no longer a Canadian citizen. Imagine growing up in
Sorry
Canada
for
all those
interrupting.
years.
Time is up. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan for 2.5 minutes. Ms. Kwan, you can please begin.
I'd like to turn a moment to Mr. Halan, who also, I think, cares deeply about this issue and been working closely with Don Chapman and others. Would he be opposed to amendments or changing the laws to ensure that those who are second generation born that has been affected as a result of Bill C-37 are able to have citizenship conferred to themselves and to their children? Would Mr. Halan be opposed to that?
Thank you, Madam Kwan, and I want to thank you as well for all your work on this. I'll reiterate what the Senator said. I think that if we want to address any of these other issues, I think they should come in the form of a separate bill. I think that with this one being so narrow and the scope of it being so to recognize just a group of lost Canadians and all the work that's been poured in now to today, we know that definitely sometimes there's bills when there's more amendments. It takes that much longer to get things passed, more debate, and we have time working against us now. I think, as I said before, this is the closest we've ever gotten with this bill to recognize that small group.
Thank
it's a very
you.
narrow thing.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you're not opposed to those kinds of amendments and that you're not opposed to the idea of recognizing war heroes as citizens because they were born in before 1947.
Yeah,
Am I hearing that correctly? Just a yes or no answer.
I just want to say that there's no opposition to recognize those people, but not in the form of the bill in its current state.
Thank you. Yes, the form of the bill in its current state does not address it, and of course what would be required would be amendments to the bill to address those properly. And I get it that we can always wait and wait and wait, but of course as we wait, people's lives are being destroyed. And I know, Mr. Halan, that you would not want people's lives destroyed, that you would want their ability to reunite with their loved ones, because some of them are separated from their loved ones right now. Some of them are unable to come to Canada because they are actually immobilized because of the bill changes from C-37. So we would want to fix that expeditiously, one would assume. So I do want to now then turn a moment to Bill C, on this bill on the age 28 rule. The age 28 rule also meant that people who applied before age 28 but who were denied because they were not able to meet the residency rule, because there's the grant process and they couldn't do it, and because of the residency rule. And so those people's lives have been destroyed. And this bill does not actually go back to
sorry
address
for
that.
interrupting, Ms.
Should we not
Kwan.
fix that too?
Sorry for interrupting. Time
Maybe
is
just
up
a
for
quick
Ms.
yes
Kwan.
or no?
Time is up, so we will have to, because we are on a tight schedule, we will now proceed to Mr. Kimmich for 4 minutes, and then we will end the panel with Mr. Dhaliwal for 4 minutes. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no other motions to table or give verbal notice for, so I'll go straight to questions. Mr. Halan, can I just hear from you, just to follow up on Ms. Kwan's question about amending the bill at this stage, whatever those amendments are, to include other groups of lost Canadians not considered by the Senate or the House of Commons at the second reading vote. Are you in favor of doing that, or were you saying that we should pass this bill and it can be reconsidered either by a member or by a government bill?
Thank you, Mr. Kimmich, through you, Madam Chair. The latter, exactly what you said. I think that it's more of a working against time at this point to be able to address some of the, the hardships that those people face that are specific to this bill. Sometimes when we open up the scope and the more amendments that we're going to have, it'll open up debate further, and working against time before a next election, we're in a minority parliament, we may basically destroy all that work and leave out everybody if we don't get to this point and pass this one the way it is today. That's my fear.
Thank you for that. So, Senator Martin, I was going to ask you, if there are amendments made to this bill, and some of them I believe would be perhaps out of scope to the original intent when it was brought here, because the Senate didn't consider it, right, S-230 at the time was considered, was studied at committee, S-245 was kind of expedited through the Senate because it was the same bill. Do you believe senators, your colleagues, will want to do a full review at a Senate committee before passing the bill?
Yes, so there is that possibility, and I did speak to my critic when I was going to be appearing here and to say that there's talk of amendments and going beyond the scope, and she just kind of looked at me with, oh, well, then that will change how we respond in the Senate. But again, I would just urge the committee to look at this very narrow focus, unless we can get this done. I started specifically with the small group that we can all get behind, and with the other Lost Canadian categories, we can look at that afterwards. So I would urge the committee to help support this bill as is.
Okay. And do you think there'll be any concerns expressed by senators at the fact that this committee heard one version testimony saying there are issues, and then 2 years ago at the Senate committee, government officials of a higher, more senior rank, including an assistant deputy minister, expressed no concerns at the content of the bill? How will senators react to that? And are they likely to call more witnesses just to ensure that they get a fulsome answer to explain why the department's position seems to have shifted over 2 years?
Well, it was curious to me when I read the Hansard, in fact, so I'm assuming other senators will also have questions.
Okay. How much time do I have? 1 minute? So I wanted to ask, there's been this question about those who applied in that small window and who were rejected, that they are not included. So we talked a little bit about that. Do you have any concerns, or have you heard concerns from senators that this is an issue about those people who applied and were rejected at the time when they were making the application?
We did not address that in the Senate. We were looking at just those that will be captured by the H-28 rule.
So you're satisfied that those individuals, although not captured in this bill, had a possibility of redress under previous legislation, and that is not an issue with the S-245?
Yeah, I don't see that as an issue. I just sort of put forward the bill in its very sort of narrow and specific form, and hope that the committee will support the bill.
Okay, that's all the questions I had, Madam Chair.
Mr. Dhaliwal for 4 minutes. Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Martin, I want to thank you for thinking about the lost Canadians. And I want to thank you for helping me. I'm sure you recall, when you bring in private members' bill, and one of the senators, conservative senators, took an adjournment, and you were the deputy leader, and you were there, and Senator Tanullah John was there to help me to get my bill on Sikh. April as a Sikh Heritage Month, and I recall, and I see, urge on your side and a passion on your side as well to get it through. But on the other hand, I have some questions here. I'm sure you and Mr. Hullen will be able to answer. And I'm also one of the people that came to Canada in 1984 as an immigrant in Calgary and got my citizenship at the very first opportunity in 1987. So, Senator, I know that you have done significant research into the changes made to the Citizenship Act in 2009 and 15. We know those changes came into effect on a delayed basis through a coming into force provision. Considering all the complications highlighted by IRCC officials, do you think a coming into force provision might help ensure that Bill S-245 doesn't lead to unintended consequences? If not, why?
Yes, so I have no issue with adding a coming into force clause. I hadn't thought of that, but having heard from the officials, if that will provide some stability, I would be open to that clause.
Well, I'm going to do Mr. Hullen because I love Calgary and Force Lawn, of course. I used to go every day. Here we go. Mr. Hullen, you are saying to MP Kwan that you aren't against ultimately recognizing other lost Canadians. Understanding there are a big groups, but we have talked about the very small group of former Section 8 people. Why do you disagree that this bill should scope those other people in?
Thank you, Mr. Dhaliwal. And I am not at all either opposed to getting those people, others, recognized, but my fears are that we're running against time right now. Mr. Dhaliwal, you've been around here much longer than I have. And we know that time is sometimes it works against us in these bills. And I'm afraid that the bigger this scope gets, the more complicated and the more debate that will take place. And I think my friend, Senator Yonah Martin, was very specific for this group, just to get it this far now. And if an election is called, all that good work is going to go. I would encourage, just like my friend did, that, any one of us as parliamentarians and even someone in the Senate can also bring forward another bill, much like this one, that could address the other other people who fall into different categories. And that's another option that can be brought. I'm afraid that if an election gets called because we're in a minority parliament, this group of lost Canadians will also be, unfairly, they'll not have the justice that they deserve, and we'll start from scratch all over again. And we've gotten this far. It's taken a lot of work from the good people on this committee, in Parliament, my good friend Yonah Martin, Don Chapman, who's been an absolute champion to getting things this far. And I think that it would be wrong for us to not be able to right the wrong, I should say, sorry, to these people who lost their citizenship unfairly.
Mr. Allen, I totally understand. When the election call, I went through my bill through the minority parliament as well. I can see.
Dhaliwal, time is up. Your 4 minutes are gone.
So fast?
So we will have to end this panel. We will have to proceed to the second panel now. With this, I want to thank MP Martin and Senator Martin and MP Hallan for appearing before the committee and for all the work which you have put into this bill. So this panel comes to an end, and I suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that we can allow the next panel to come. Thank you.
Good.
On behalf of the committee members, I would like to welcome our witnesses for this panel. Today, where did they go? Okay, where did they go? Today, we are joined by Mr. Randall Emery, Executive Director, Canadian Citizens' Rights Council. We are also joined by Daniel Bernhardt, Chief Executive Officer, Institute for Canadian Citizenship. And our third witness is Don Chapman, founder and head of Lost Canadians. And our last witness for today is Amandeep Hire, Canadian Bar Association, British Columbia Immigration Law Section. So we will begin with Mr. Hire. If you can please begin, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. And after the opening remarks, we will go into round of questioning. So Mr. Hire, if you can please begin. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. My name is Amandeep Hire. I am the Secretary of the Canadian Bar Association of BC's Immigration Law Section, and I appear today on behalf of the CBA National Immigration Law Section. The CBA is a national association of 37,000 members, including lawyers, judges, notaries, academics, and law students. We have a 120-year-old mandate to seek improvements in the law and the administration of justice. Thank you for having me address the committee from Surrey, BC, the traditional and unceded ancestral territory of the Katzie, Simeawu, Kwantlen, and other Coast Salish First Nations. My purpose for being here today is to, one, express our support for the bill and the goals advanced by the bill, suggest an amendment to the bill to clarify to when citizenship will be restored to, and three, to address two specific concerns the CBA section has with the state of citizenship law today. The section supports the goals advanced by this bill. The bill allows another group of lost Canadians to reacquire the benefits of Canadian citizenship. But we note there is an omission. It does not state when citizenship will be restored to. Will it be the date the bill comes into effect, or the date citizenship was lost? These are important questions because they will have implications for the subjects of the restoration. If the restoration is the date the bill is approved, it could impact the legal rights they have in other countries. For example, a country which does not permit dual citizenship, acquisition of citizenship after birth may be grounds to revoke citizenship in that country. Previous amendments to the Act designed to restore citizenship on those Canadians who had lost it intentionally specified to what date citizenship will be restored to. See Section 3.7 as one such example. Our recommendation is that the bill be amended to clarify to what date citizenship will be restored to. The next issue is the forgotten Canadians. Citizenship law has evolved over time, so the values that underpin the social fabric of our nation have changed. Citizenship law has followed suit. But echoes of the former laws and its values still reverberate through the current legislation. One such example is a group of Canadians related to the subject of this bill, who were denied access to Canadian citizenship from the outset. Between January 1st, 1947 and February 15th, 1977, a person born outside of Canada could only inherit Canadian citizenship if their parents were married and their father was a Canadian citizen, or if their parents were unmarried, their mother was a Canadian citizen. On February 15th, 1977, the current Act came into effect. For those born before that date, the Act continued to apply the old law under Section 3.1e. But under Section 5.2, a provision existed for people granted citizenship to be granted citizenship if they could not qualify for it under Section 3.1e because the wrong parent was Canadian. But the grant had an issue. For those who qualified under Section 3.1e, their effective date of citizenship was their date of birth, while those who qualified under Section 5.2 was the date the grant was approved. Since citizens by descent are only citizens if they were born after their parents became Canadian, there was a direct implication on their children. For those who were approved under Section 5.2, only those children born after the date of approval would be Canadian. For those who were approved under Section 3.1e, their effective date of citizenship was their date of birth, but the children would be subject to the Section 8 retention requirements that are the subject of this bill. Since which section applied depended entirely on the gender and the marital status of the parent, we contend that it is contrary to Section 15 of the Charter, as the Supreme Court held in Benner in Canada. Therefore, our recommendation is that the Act be amended to deem everyone whose parents apply for Canadian citizenship under Section 5.2 to also be Canadians today. Finally, I'd like to address the first-generation limit. We note that the first-generation limit has unintended hardships for people who have certain strong ties to Canada but may be born in the second or subsequent generation. One such example might be a mother who goes into labor while shopping in the US. The CBA section encourages Parliament to consider these impacts and the possible mitigating measures. Thank you very much, and I welcome your questions.
We will now proceed to Mr. Daniel Bernhard, Chief Executive Officer, Institute for Canadian Citizenship. You can please begin. You will have 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you on the importance of Canadian citizenship. Even though I'm not an expert on lost Canadians that you are talking about this afternoon, I would like to put this conversation in the larger context of Canadian citizenship and its importance.
Canadian citizenship, which I am so honored to lead, facilitates and encourages newcomers to complete the journey to full and active Canadian citizenship, not just in their passports, but also in their hearts. Our work, therefore, is an act of service, not just to immigrants, but to all of Canada, because when newcomers decide that this is my place, that these are my people, they contribute their talent and energy and resourcefulness to our shared success. With the best of the world on our team and contributing to their full potential, Canada can be unstoppable. And citizenship, I believe, is at the heart of that promise. It's all about whether immigrants believe they're on our team. Each of you, of course, is a member of a team, a political team, and so you would understand the power of that experience well. Our organization hosts 60 enhanced citizenship ceremonies per year in partnership with IRCC. I get to attend a handful of them, and I can say without a doubt that this is the best part of my job. Unlike standard ceremonies, we hold wonderful roundtable discussions where new citizens reflect on their journeys and on the significance of this moment. Now, no two stories are the same, but they are uniformly moving. From these new citizens, I've learned that becoming Canadian is like passing through a one-way door. Behind you lies a long path of hard work and often hardship, sometimes spanning multiple generations. Before you, however, lies another path, also reaching deep into the future, but this one is paved with a sense of peace and security and relief that many of us who are born in Canada may struggle to understand. Now, I know a bit about this, and many of you do as well. When my daughter was born, she was the first person in our family born in the same country as her parents in almost 150 years. For a century, we were on the run, and thanks to my parents' decision to immigrate to Canada, we're now finally home for good. Today's conversation, however, is particularly important because of plummeting naturalization rates. In February, our organization released new data showing that the proportion of permanent residents who become citizens within 10 years has dropped 40% between 2001 and 2021. These data draw attention to uncomfortable truths about Canada that we have really yet to confront, and they compel us to change our perspective from a frankly self-satisfied view that we must restrict Canadian citizenship lest everyone in the world pursue it, to a more humble outlook centered around a commitment to restore the promise and desirability of being Canadian. In other words, I urge you not to limit your gaze to the so-called lost Canadians of the past, but also to remember the lost Canadians of the present and future, millions of people who could join Team Canada but are choosing not to. Les conséquences de la chute des
The consequences of the drop in permanent residents who become citizens during their first decade in the country are profound and severe. Imagine, for example, a future where a large percentage of the population is not allowed to vote. This is not a policy aside, but the effect is similar. The sense of belonging has very powerful impacts. People who are not dedicated to our society, people who are not involved in our culture, are not contributing their best to the success of our society. And the reason is simple. They don't see it as their own society. We are all involved or faced with this danger.
Restore the value of being Canadian, and the Institute for Canadian Citizenship is leading the way with our Canoe Access Pass, which today gives over 150,000 newcomers free VIP entry to over 1,400 of our country's best culture and nature attractions, making Canada easier to love and harder to leave. With your support, we can continue to grow and become a standard feature of the Canadian immigration experience. Grâce à notre laissez-passer culturel.
Thanks to our Cultural Pass Canoe, about 1,000 newcomers visit the best cultural and outdoor venues every day. They have fun, they meet us and they learn about our culture and join in to that culture.
To restore the promise of being Canadian, not just for the few, but also for the many. And I hope today's conversation supports those who were edged out of citizenship in the past for their own sake, but also to remind us about all those who can and should become Canadian in future, but may choose not to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Emery, Executive Director, Canadian Citizens' Rights Council. You can please begin. You will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Randall Emery. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and the Executive Director of the Canadian Citizens' Rights Council, which stands for Democratic, Equality, Multicultural, and Mobility Rights. We applaud Senator Martin and MP Howland for sponsoring Bill S-245, which would address one of several inequities in citizenship law for children born abroad. We also call on them and all parties to champion amendments to address more lost Canadians. As we balance competing concerns, we should think about 3 things: our Constitution, international considerations, and the human cost of continued inaction. First, Canada should respect equality and mobility rights when addressing citizenship by descent. I've met many of you personally, and I understand the concern for people passing through Canada. However, just as people pass through Canada, Canadians pass through other countries. Moreover, some Canadians have genuine connections to Canada and other countries at the same time. If we employ some connection test, we should apply it to all 3 groups equally. Failing that, we should at least give impacted Canadians the same deal we afford government workers. Current law forces some Canadians to choose between mobility rights and the legal and moral duty to care for our children. For example, as described in the ongoing Charter Challenge, a Canadian parent has been exiled with her children on multiple occasions since 2017, with the child now experiencing suicidal ideation. This is unjust and unfair. Second, Canada should follow other countries to avoid the worst unintended consequences. Canada ranks dead last on family unity. When we compare ourselves to the G7, our European trading partners, Australia, New Zealand, and other continental American countries. Half of these countries ensure unlimited citizenship by descent by simple operation of law. Another quarter ensure citizenship retroactive to birth, provided the birth is registered. We are at the bottom of a cohort dominated by English-speaking countries, which creates its own problems for us as a shared culture. The counterpoint to concerns about job restrictions abroad due to automatic citizenship is the concern for family separation due to lost citizenship. Some countries revoke citizenship if you voluntarily apply for another. Examples include Japan, Spain, Germany, and Austria. To avoid the more serious consequence to a much larger group of people, we recommend that citizenship be opt-out with renunciation versus opt-in with a grant application. Finally, we must consider the human cost of continued inaction. In addition to the Charter Challenge, stories submitted during this study clearly illustrate the harm to individual families. One mother has 3 daughters, 2 of whom are Canadian and 1 whom is not, simply because of the year of their birth. One family has ended 6 generations of Canadian heritage because the mother was born abroad in the 80s, lived in Canada for nearly 30 years, and then went on to have children in the UK. The problem also impacts my children, seated in this room today. Officials told you last week that the scope includes untold numbers of children, possibly in the tens of thousands. In other words, the law inflicts severe harm to Canadian families in vast numbers. The egregiousness of the issue calls for an immediate response. Let me conclude by again thanking Senator Martin and MP Howland for sponsoring this bill. We implore them to champion amendments with members of all parties to address as many lost Canadian issues as possible, including the many historical ones. Thank you.
We'll now proceed to Mr. Don Chapman, founder and head of Lost Canadians. Mr. Chapman, you can please begin. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you. When Canada stripped me of my citizenship in 1961, many of you had not been born. I was 6, so I so relate to the lost Canadian children of today. They're watching you, and by not including them, you're compounding their rejection and pain. They're not stupid. They know Canada doesn't want them. It's akin to being booted out of your own family. I know the agony and the gut-wrenching feelings, both as a child and as an adult. With Bill S3 in 2005, I could be Canadian again, but my minor-age daughters weren't welcome, and I was born in Canada. Canada must do what it preaches: fairness, compassion, inclusion, peace, order, good government, equal rights, and above all, human rights. With Lost Canadians, Canada has failed miserably. As an airline pilot, I'd never ditch an airplane and willingly leave my passengers behind. As a Canadian, I can't leave fellow Lost Canadians behind, and particularly children and babies, and neither should you. Without amendments, you'll be condoning forced family separation, tiered citizenship, statelessness, women having fewer rights than men, and booting out Canada's 111,000 soldiers. To stand on guard for thee, is that just hyperbole? Canada's contravening 3 UN human rights conventions, the Charter, the Canadian Bill of Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the rule of law. Are you okay with that? For lost Canadian children, depression, anxiety, loss, suicide, they suffer no different than the residential school survivors. Did you know that lost Canadians include Indigenous people? That the Catholic Church sold Canadian babies, the murdered Butterbox babies, pre-1947 Chinese Canadians? Should they be remembered as only stateless registered aliens? Bureaucrats talk about unintended consequences and of creating future lost Canadians. Well, that ship has sailed. Let's talk about intended consequences. By not adding amendments, you'll be creating far more lost Canadians. 13 years ago, I gave a detailed report to Nicole Girard. Nothing happened except the issue got exponentially worse. We're here today because of intended consequences. Bureaucrats want 5-4 grants. It's a cruel and awful solution. An IRCC Director General recently explained to me how the 5-4 process has become political, with the outcome being at the whim of a bureaucrat or politician. It should be by operation of law. The children of one family have been denied 5 times in 14 years. From newborns to teenagers, all they know is rejection. There's a 12-year-old Canadian citizen orphan boy currently in Syria. IRCC canceled his caretaker aunt's citizenship without a hearing or judicial review. One day she's Canadian, the next she's not. IRCC encouraged her to apply for a grant. It was approved 3 years ago, but 2 citizenship ministers won't sign off. This Canadian child is currently in an earthquake war zone. His twin sister and father were killed by a random terrorist bombing. If anything happens to this boy, Minister Fraser, by his inaction, makes Canada an accomplice. Remember Ellen Kurdi? Are you ready for that negative press from around the world? I have 28 other horror stories of 5-4 grants, including my own. Sometimes individuals got deported. For example, Pete Geisbrecht, an age 28 person, he was given by IRCC 30 days to voluntarily get out of Canada. If he didn't leave, he would be shackled with bracelets. The authorities threatened him in front of his wife and child, and they will never forget. Lost Canadian Romeo Dallaire called IRCC's process inhumane and bureaucratic terrorism. Bureaucrats are consistently inconsistent and make lots of mistakes. Case processors often don't know the laws and they come and go. There have been 4 citizenship ministers just under Mr. Trudeau. What's needed is a dedicated citizenship ombudsman. Since 2009, SIM has done 128 studies, only 6 on citizenship. So obviously, citizenship is not your priority. Canada is supposed to turn immigrants and refugees into good Canadian citizens, and I can show with me, they often turn Canadian citizens into immigrants. They do it the wrong way. After one of our court cases, Monty Solberg said the decision would cost tens of billions. That's a lot of money just to keep Canadians out of their own country. There's another charter challenge. It's going to be heard next month. The government's arguing against equal rights. We're arguing for. If the government wins, out goes the Charter of Rights and Freedoms as you know it. Without amendments, there'll be many more charter challenges. With amendments, that becomes moot. As for derivative claims or conferring citizenship to people unknowingly or any other concerns, I can help you. I want to fix the issue once and for all, and I hope you do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will now proceed to our round of questioning. We will begin our first round with Mr. Redekop. Mr. Redekop, you can please begin. You will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for sharing your valuable testimony today. What's the value of Canadian citizenship? I believe that's the question that we have to look at. 7 days ago, a week ago, we began study of this legislation, and at that time, I gave a notice of motion regarding citizenship ceremonies, which is the backbone of our immigration system. And my motion basically calls on the government to prioritize in-person citizenship ceremonies, but allow virtual ceremonies if that's specifically requested, and most importantly, not allow people to get their citizenship by clicking a mouse. And newcomers that I talk to really value these citizenship ceremonies, but the government seems to be trying to downplay and even eliminating these ceremonies. So my first question is for Mr. Barnhart from the Institute of Canadian Citizenship. Your organization puts on many citizenship ceremonies. Do you see the inherent value in in-person ceremonies?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. And any, deviation from that is like, going through a university degree and not having the opportunity to graduate in public and reflect on the significance of that moment. So becoming Canadian is a momentous occasion for individuals and for families, as many of the witnesses today have testified, that a strong desire to reestablish their Canadian citizenship. So for the hundreds of thousands of people who would become Canadian citizens every year, I think one of the fellows mentioned that there were perhaps 10,000 people affected by the current subject. We're talking about 1,000 a day in some cases who are eligible to become Canadian citizens through naturalization. If they're deprived of this opportunity to reflect, I think that that degrades the importance of Canadian citizenship, not just for them, but for all of us who can participate in that celebration.
So do you think that if the government continues to minimize ceremonies with this latest idea, for example, of just an online click kind of a situation, does that hurt the overall value of citizenship in Canada?
I think it's a contributing factor. One of the other witnesses mentioned that the committee, spends relatively little time studying citizenship. I think citizenship is sort of the forgotten member of the trio of immigration, refugees, and citizenship that the ministry is tasked with and the committee are tasked with. So there are a number of factors that I think are leading to this, but the data show clearly that Canadian citizenship is becoming less desirable. The market value of Canadian citizenship is plummeting among permanent residents who are eligible to claim it, and this certainly wouldn't help.
So it's almost like the government is using the pandemic and the backlog that they created as a convenient excuse to implement this new plan for people to gain citizenship, as though it was nothing more than just clicking, scrolling through Facebook, looking at some TMZ gossip, watching a cat video, and then click a link and video and become a Canadian citizen. So have you seen any way a change in the way that the government treats citizenship ceremonies since March of 2020?
I mean, they've gone virtual, obviously. I think, I can't speak to the government's motives. I would just like to point out that there are people who do suffer very, real harms as a result of delays in having their citizenship applications processed. Your permanent residency expires. You are waiting for your citizenship application to come through. It's 2 or 3 times longer than the service standard. A relative gets sick in another country, for example, and you can't go visit them because you're worried you won't be able to come back in. So we've seen that there are real consequences for people. I understand the government and the ministry's desire to speed up this process. I would just hope that they'd be able to find those efficiencies elsewhere.
We just have heard some testimony in the last hour about this bill, S-245, and that the purpose of this bill is really to rectify mistakes that have been made in the past and it affects a very small cohort of people. And we also heard from others who would like to expand this bill and make it a bit larger to include many other people and potentially complicate and perhaps even prevent this bill from going forward because of overly complicating it. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on S-245, if you have any thoughts on it, if you've looked at it at all.
I have looked at it. I think there are other witnesses who are obviously have a stronger personal and in some cases professional connection to the subject. And I would, encourage you to seek out their opinion. But in terms of overall prioritization of who is and is not becoming citizenship, I would just repeat what I said earlier, that if we're talking about, maybe 10,000 people who might be affected by something like this, in the last year alone, we put through that many citizens in 10 days. And so the number of lost Canadians in some senses as a result of the dropping desirability of becoming Canadian is far larger, and in my mind anyways, a far more pressing priority for the committee and for the government of Canada to be looking at than a relatively smaller group who are clearly suffering personal consequences from this. But the fact that we can refer to them by name suggests that the group is in many cases smaller.
So with regard, just one last question. You talked about the percentage of PRs who fail to become citizens. What's a number, what's an idea? What are your thoughts on how we could improve that and encourage more people to become citizens?
In 2001, 75% of permanent residents became citizens within 10 years of arrival. In 2021, that number had dropped to 45%. So it's been a precipitous decline. I think there are a number of factors, including factors relating to the cost of applying for citizenship, which is over $600 for a person, for a family of four, for example. That's real money. But also about people's experiences in Canada, getting to the point where you want to apply for citizenship. Economic integration, credential recognition, social integration, having fun, having friends. This touches on housing, availability of our services like healthcare and childcare. We need to make sure that immigrants have a successful time of it in Canada and that they want to be considered Canadian. So I think there are a number of different ways to look at this, but the data have been declining for over 20 years. It's a concerning trend that I think we ought to turn our attention towards.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Mr. Redekop. We will now proceed to Ms. Lalonde. Ms. Lalonde, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to say thank you to each of our witnesses for being here today. I do have a few questions, and I would like to focus my attention on Mr. Hayter on this particular bill of 245. In the previous hour, Mr. Hayter, we've talked a lot about the scope of people that would be impacted with S-245. In your professional opinion, do you think S-245 is too narrow, too broad, or does it strike a good balance? And if I may, as I'm going to be asking you more questions, but could you briefly elaborate on why you've chosen that options?
Yeah, so I think that might be, so the question about whether or not the bill is whatever the scope is, I think that's more for Parliament to decide. Our position is that there are others who have been impacted by the loss of Canadian citizenship who should also be considered, whether that be within this bill or within a future bill. We would like those people to be considered as well.
Thank you very much for that. So if I could go on in saying, basically every speech I've listened to on this topic, and sadly has pointed out that every time someone tried to tinker with the Citizenship Act, we end up with unintended consequences, which typically take the form of a new group of lost Canadians. Do you have any concerns that S-245, as written, may create additional or different groups of lost Canadians? And if so, how do you recommend that we stop that from happening?
Well, I recognized one in the group. There is a very closely related group of individuals who actually have similar birth dates, similar sort of circumstances. The only thing that's different is the gender and marital status of the grandparents. So that is a group which will come up and I think should be addressed. These individuals, they just happen to be born to the wrong generation of, the wrong gender or marital status of a grandparent. And as a result, their citizenship was denied because their parents applied for a grant under Section 5.4. That was approved after their date of birth. They just will never be Canadian under the current legislation. As for improving it, I think that deserves more study by Parliament. There have been several committee reports we note at the CPA immigration section, which have made recommendations, and I will refer to those as well.
Well, I'm going to talk to you about, because you've written articles for the Canadian Bar Association on past changes made to the Citizenship Act. And in 2020, you wrote an article entitled Citizenship Law is Too Rigid for Those Abroad with Family Ties to Canada, in which you stated, and I'll quote, arguably the first generation limitation has merit. Can you actually elaborate on where you can see merit in this rule?
So the position of the CBA on that is different than my position. So I would like to refer to the CBA's position, which is we should look into this. One of the reasons we want to look into this is that the CBA does not want a situation where people have ties to Canada or being denied access to Canadian citizenship. And I would like to put it again back to Parliament to figure out how we can expand access beyond the first generation.
So, and I'm sorry to have to come back, but I really want to come back on that article from 2020, Mr. Heyer. You actually identified that the U.S. has a different approach to generational limits to citizenship. Can you explain to us how the rule works in the U.S. and how that differs from Canada's approach, please?
Sure, I can provide some commentary, which is in the U.S., the way it works is more based off of residential ties after your 14th birthday. Now, the specifics are basically if you've lived in the U.S. for a certain period of time and then you happen to have a child born outside of the U.S., that child would be a U.S. citizen. And you just have to make an application to prove that's the case. And it's part of their application to be approved the equivalent of a U.S. citizenship certificate.
Thank you again. And could you explain to this committee the difference between someone who has received a grant of citizenship versus someone who has had their citizenship restored through a change in legislation, such as what is proposed through this particular bill in S245, please?
Sure. So with a grant, that means grant, another term for that is naturalization. So the date the grant is approved or a person takes the oath of Canadian citizenship, depending on how the grant worked, that is the date their effective date of citizenship is. Now, if I'm assuming what you mean is my specific submissions, which were on the question of Section 5.2 as well as Section 3.1e. So with Section 5.2, what happened was when the grant was approved, it was approved on the date. IRCC would send out a letter saying, "Yep, we agree that your grandparents were Canadian, so your parents were Canadian. It was the wrong gender, therefore we're going to approve you as a grant. Your effective date of citizenship is the date of this letter." With somebody who had it restored afterwards, with the restoration, what they did is they take everyone back and they said, well, we're just going to create a bit of a magic pencil. We're going to go all the way back in time, take it all the way back to your date of birth, and we'll deem you to be a citizen the entire time. Those individuals I mentioned under Section 5.2, that's what happened to them in 2009. In 2009, they are retroactively canceled all those grants. They made it all retroactive to the date of birth. But if you take a look at our submissions, it says their children were never put into the system. So under Section 3.4, there's a transition clause. If somebody was a citizen, they would be able to continue to maintain the citizenship if they were born in the second or subsequent generation. With the 5.2 applicants, there was an exemption. They said, well, actually, if you're the child born in the second or subsequent generation, you will not have your citizenship retroactively restored.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Heyer.
We will now proceed to Mr. Savard Tremblay. You will have 6 minutes. You can
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank all of our witnesses for your presentations. Mr. Chapman, you are in some way a pioneer of the issue that is before us today. And I imagine that you can talk at length about the consequences faced by individuals or short-term, medium-term, long-term consequences of this legislation as well. And you went on the legal front as well. So I just want to hear you elaborate. I mean, you can use all of my time to elaborate on any topic of your choosing.
I'll say is I learned from the woman behind me, Millie Fai, and the Quebecers, the French Canadians, understand the Book de Famille more than the English side. They understand what it's like to be stripped of their identities and culture. And that's exactly what we're doing with the Lost Canadians. As far as Nicole Girard, her comments of saying that we're going to create new Lost Canadians, no, I don't agree with that. And the argument that they're going to, and what the gentleman from the Canadian Bar Association just referred to, was we're going to give them retroactive citizenship, which takes away their ability or their right to say that I was born in Canada, like being in a citizenship ceremony. The government didn't seem to have a problem doing that with Bill C-37, because that's exactly what they did to children of lost Canadians who were naturalized. They were deemed to be born in Canada, and then they retroactively took that right away. He also made reference to the Supreme Court decision in Benner versus Canada, which was about women's rights and criminality, both of them. And what the government did was freeze into law that gender discrimination. So today, women have less rights than men to confer citizenship. This is devastating. And to be really honest with you, I want all of this done. I wanted it done, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, I lost my citizenship in 1961, and I've been fighting ever since. And I have to say that I was an airline pilot. I mean, I would not leave people behind, and I won't do it now because we're going to keep fighting. But in all honesty, this is a choice, and the bureaucrats have made the choice to deliberately leave people out. And they've been doing this for decades. This is just a matter of sitting down, really checking this out and talking, and we can fix this very easily. And there are a lot of people, even to pre-1947, the Chinese, they were considered to be stateless registered aliens. They were not. They were citizens. And the government is still, to this day, saying that citizenship began on January 1st of 47. Most people do not realize that Mackenzie King stripped the Japanese of their citizenship in 1946 and deported them. And Minister Haiju, just a year ago, announced that they're going to give citizenship back to those people who enfranchised before 1946. So there are just huge ramifications, and it's not a small group of people. It's 1 million to 2 million people. But when Bill C-37 passed, since then there have been about 20,000 people that have had claims, even though there are 1 million to 2 million people. For all these reasons of derivative claims, it's not going to happen. So thank you for what you're doing. It's very important to fix this bill.
Well, I don't know if the gentleman from the Canadian Bar Association would like to add anything to what we just heard.
No, I'll let Don Chapman-Swartz stand for himself.
Could I add? The Benner decision was about Mark Benner, who was a convicted murderer from the United States, born in wedlock to a U.S. father and Canadian mother. It was a unanimous Supreme Court decision in 1997, and a lone bureaucrat canceled that decision in 2004 and immediately went back to discriminating against women. So the Supreme Court has answered the question on whether you're a criminal or not a criminal, whether you're born in or out of wedlock. I don't know how the government is not being held accountable for this, because the gentleman from the Canadian Bar Association is right. Second generation born abroad by operation of law. It should already be there.
You have 50 seconds.
So in 50 seconds, what I understand is that the bill in its current form would benefit from the changes you just mentioned, from the amendments you evoked. and there are certain gray areas at this point in time.
And I can also say that the restoration of citizenship, there are consequences when you go to retire. Just because we give it back to you, there could be a period in a pension down the road where they say you weren't paying into it or you weren't Canadian for a 10-year period. We've already gone through that with the War Bride children.
Merci.
Thank you.
Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I want to make a distinction about lost Canadians versus immigrants. Lost Canadians, we're talking about when Bill C-37 came in and took away the right of passing on your citizenship to your descendants for second generation born and on, is the loss of those individuals' birthright. Immigrants are people like me who immigrated to Canada and through the naturalization process became a citizen. So I just want to hear from the witnesses the distinction between those two things. What are we talking about here when we're talking about lost Canadians? Are we talking about people's birthrights that has been taken away from them? To both Mr. Chapman and Mr. Emery.
Yes.
Let's go.
Yes. Okay. So yes, we're talking about Canadians who've lost their birthright. In my own family, we came in the 1800s, and this has been a recurring pattern for a long time.
This should be a birthright, and it is not. It has nothing to do with immigration. And by the way, when they did take away rights, that goes against what's called the Interpretation Act, which says you cannot obliterate rights, and that's what happened in Bill C-37.
Thank you. Now, we heard, and you both heard, from the previous panel, Senator Martin, who brought this bill before us, and of course the sponsor of the bill from the House of Commons, MP Halan. Both said that we should not be advancing amendments to Bill S-245. Would you agree with that? And if not, why not? If yes, you can expand.
This is a tough question because, again, I mentioned to Mr. Savard Tremblay that I want this to be done 10 years ago, but it's not. So it's a gamble. Really, that's what it is. Do I turn and say, okay, I'll take the bill as is in case there is an election, or do I put it off? And to be honest with you, I want the children. They're the ones that are suffering with suicide, mental problems, families being torn up, not being forced family separation where they can't even live together. That, to me, is the most important. So I would gamble this bill just to get those amendments on because I want the children in first.
And I concur also. Just to give you a very personal example, my oldest daughter was 1 year old when the after first generation exceptions were first put into place, and she's a young woman now. In a couple of years, she could have children of her own. How much longer do we have to wait?
Okay, so...
Can I just mention, when Bill S-230 died, it was brought back up in the Senate and passed third reading in 5 days. It was sent to the House, and in the first month it was passed. So really, I don't see if there's an election it's going to be any different.
So it's not necessarily the case that we can't shepherd this through. If there's the political will to do so, that we can do so. I heard, comments about bureaucrats, and bureaucrats sort of do their thing. But what happened here with lost Canadians is this. Under Bill C-37, it was the politicians of the day who stripped the rights of Canadians in passing on their citizenship with the second generation rule cutoff. It's the politicians who did that. So here we have in a situation where we have an opportunity to make changes for the better, to restore the people who's had their rights taken away. Should we not take every chance to make them whole, as was indicated about the impact of the families and how children have been impacted and left languishing because they've lost their rights and been rejected? Should we not take every opportunity right now to actually make them whole, to address this question?
Every opportunity, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, on the question around stripping of rights, So one perspective is to say, give them a grant process so they can apply. Another perspective, as I think has been mentioned by the both of you, is that to say to do the reverse onus. For those who do not want it, and to which is their right, they can say they don't want it. If they don't want it, then if they notify IRCC and appoint notification, could we not then put in changes to say, upon notification, that their citizenship would be of no force and effect? That is to say, the bill would be of no force and effect for them, for those who do not want their citizenship conferred to them.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, if you're Irish, you have the rights to Irish citizenship. If you're Israeli, you have the right for Israeli citizenship. It doesn't mean you're a citizen. And if you have a child and you're two Canadian parents, child born in the United States, the child's not Canadian until you apply and get it. So just because you have a right doesn't mean you are.
Mr. Emery?
And in addition, there are the countries that I mentioned before as examples where if you voluntarily apply for another citizenship, you will lose this. You will lose the citizenship. So for anyone who comes by multiple citizenship through their parents and has family in more than one country, they would lose the ability to see them and lose their rights. That is a much, much bigger issue to be concerned with when we talk about unintended consequences.
The other thing, that citizenship is not a right in Canada, it's a privilege. Anybody on this table could have their citizenship taken. I've dealt with members of Parliament who all of a sudden showed up one day and they weren't Canadian anymore.
On the question...
With that, this panel comes to an end. On behalf of all the members of this committee, I really want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee and providing their input in this important legislation. And with this, the panel comes to an end and the meeting is adjourned.